She answered the phone, thinking it was just another call. But within seconds, everything she knew about her family, her town, even her own life, was turned upside down. One call revealed a secret so shocking, no one saw it coming, and it would change everything. If you want to keep uncovering the stories no one else dares to tell, stories that hit hard and stay with you long after call ends, hit that subscribe button. Join our community, and let's make sure these voices and these truths are never forgotten. The evening was quiet, almost peaceful, when Tanya Johnson's phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but something made her answer. On the other end, a voice she never expected shattered her world. It was a tip, an anonymous warning that her community was being betrayed by the very people sworn to protect it. Tanya's heart pounded as the details unfolded. Misconduct, abuse of power, and crimes hidden under uniforms and badges. She could hardly believe it. For years, complaints had gone ignored, whispers dismissed as paranoia, and yet here it was evidence that could not be denied. The caller explained that the police officer involved had crossed every line, and more than just one life was at stake. Tanya felt a mix of fear and responsibility. She knew she had to act, but the weight of what she had just learned was overwhelming. As she gathered her courage to make her next move, Tanya's mind raced. Every statistic she had read about police misconduct, every story of injustice, flashed before her eyes. She realized this was bigger than her. It was about accountability, transparency, and safety for everyone in her neighborhood. Her hands shook as she dialed the number she knew could help, hoping she wasn't too late. Minutes felt like hours. When the officer on the other end finally picked up, Tanya's voice trembled, but she held her ground. She spoke clearly, providing the details she had just received. But instead of immediate action, she felt hesitation, a cold distance that made her stomach twist. Was the system truly listening? Or would this call, her brave step forward, be swept aside like so many before? Tanya knew she couldn't wait for the system alone to respond. She began documenting everything, writing down names, dates, and conversations. Her home became a small war room of truth, each note a piece of a puzzle that needed to see the light. As the night stretched on, she realized that one call had sparked a fire, not just in her, but in a fight for justice that could no longer be ignored. And just when she thought the night couldn't get any more tense, a knock at the door made her freeze. Her heart raced as she realized that someone knew she had made the call, and that the very people she was exposing might already be watching. The air in her small apartment felt heavy, charged with fear and anticipation. Tanya's next move could change everything, or put her directly in danger. The call had exposed a truth no one saw coming, and Tanya now understood that courage came with consequences. But she also knew this was a moment where silence was not an option. As she looked out the window at the quiet streets below, she made a choice. She would see this through, no matter the cost. And in that moment, the weight of justice pressed down like never before, leaving her breathless, determined, and ready for what was coming next. Tanya couldn't sleep that night. Every sound outside her window made her jump. Every shadow in her apartment felt alive. She knew the call had triggered something bigger than herself, something that could shake the foundations of her neighborhood. But she also knew that uncovering the truth meant facing forces that would rather remain hidden. The next morning, she went to community center, hoping to find allies who understood the stakes. As she spoke to a few trusted neighbors, she realized just how widespread the fear was. Stories poured out, encounters with officers who had used their authority to intimidate, harass, and control. Each story was more shocking than the last. The numbers she had read in reports now had faces, names, and voices, and the impact was terrifying. This wasn't just one incident. It was a pattern, a system that had gone unchecked for far too long. Determined to act, Tanya began gathering evidence. She recorded conversations, saved messages, and documented the details of every incident she could confirm. It was exhausting, terrifying work, but she understood the importance. Each piece of evidence was a step toward justice, a way to hold those in power accountable. Yet, even as she worked, fear gnawed at her. She knew that the officers she was investigating would not take kindly to exposure. The risk was real, and it was immediate. Days passed, and Tanya's efforts started to get attention. Local journalists began asking questions, and suddenly the walls of secrecy were cracking. But along with the tension came danger. Strange cars parked near her apartment, anonymous messages warning her to stop, and a sense of being watched that never went away. Her heart raced every time the phone rang, every time a knock echoed through her building. Tanya understood that exposing corruption was never simple. It demanded courage, resilience, and an unshakable commitment to truth. Then came the tipping point. A community meeting was scheduled, where residents could share experiences directly with city officials. Tanya prepared, bringing her evidence and a voice strengthened by necessity. As she stepped up to speak, she could feel the weight of the room, the eyes of people who had lived in fear for years, and the officers whose misconduct was about to be laid bare. Her voice trembled at first, but she pressed on, recounting the stories, the incidents, and the evidence. The room fell silent, the air thick with disbelief and tension. By the end of the meeting, the consequences were undeniable. Officials promised investigations, journalists published detailed reports, and Tanya's bravery had sparked a community-wide awakening. But even as she felt a momentary relief, she knew the battle was far from over. The officers involved could retaliate, and the system that allowed them to act with impunity still existed. Tanya had exposed a truth no one saw coming, but the path ahead was dangerous and uncertain. As she left the meeting, she noticed a familiar car parked across the street. Her pulse quickened. Someone was watching, and she knew that courage alone might not be enough. The truth had been revealed, but the fight for justice had only just begun. Every step forward would demand vigilance, bravery, and the relentless pursuit of accountability. Tanya understood that now more than ever, one person's voice could spark change, but it could also put them directly in harm's way. Tanya's life had changed overnight. What started as a single phone call had turned into a whirlwind of attention, fear, and responsibility. She could feel eyes on her everywhere she went. Neighbors who whispered, journalists who asked questions, and the constant shadow of the officers whose actions she had exposed. Every step felt like walking on a tightrope above a city that could crumble with one misstep. Despite the fear, Tanya refused to back down. She spent long nights analyzing every piece of evidence, connecting dots that no one else had bothered to see. She studied reports, statistics, and past complaints, learning how patterns of misconduct were often ignored or dismissed. Each discovery fueled her determination and her understanding that knowledge itself could be a weapon against abuse of power. Then the threats escalated. One evening, she returned home to find her apartment door slightly ajar. Panic surged through her, and she realized that those who felt exposed were not going to sit quietly. Her pulse raced, but she didn't call anyone immediately. Instead, she documented the intrusion, took photographs, and reinforced her security. Tanya understood that staying calm, observant, and methodical was now a matter of survival. News of her courage spread throughout the city. People who had felt powerless began to speak up, sharing their own experiences with misconduct. Tanya realized that her actions were sparking a movement, that bravery could inspire others to demand accountability. But with the movement came consequences. Opponents grew bolder, spreading misinformation and trying to discredit her work. Tanya knew that every revelation she exposed carried risk, yet she couldn't let fear silence her. One night, a journalist called with shocking news. Internal Affairs had quietly opened an investigation into the officer Tanya had exposed. It was the first real sign that change might come. But alongside the hope came a grim warning. The officer had powerful allies, and there were still those within the system who preferred the truth remain hidden. Tanya's fight for justice was far from over, and she realized that vigilance and courage would have to guide every next step. The most terrifying moment came unexpectedly. A neighbor knocked on her door with a simple warning. Someone had been following her every move. Tanya felt a cold surge of fear, but she steadied herself. This was exactly why she had documented everything, why she had reached out to the community and the press. Her courage was no longer just about exposing misconduct. It was about survival, accountability, and showing others that standing up for truth mattered, even in the face of danger. By the time Tanya went to bed, exhaustion and adrenaline clashed in her body. She knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain. The call that started it all had revealed a truth no one expected, but it had also shown her the price of bravery and the importance of standing for justice. Tomorrow The fight would continue. And she was ready, because some truths are too important to ignore, and some calls are too urgent to leave unanswered. The days that followed were tense. Tanya could feel the weight of her actions pressing down on her, heavy as if the entire city expected her next move. Every phone call, every knock on the door made her pulse spike. She had exposed a truth that no one expected, but the very act of speaking out had drawn the attention of those who thrived in secrecy. One afternoon, Tanya received an unexpected message. It wasn't a threat, at least not overtly, but it was clear someone knew exactly what she was doing. "Be careful," it read. "Not everyone wants the truth to come out." The words, simple as they were, sent a chill through her. She realized the battle for justice wasn't just about exposing wrongdoing. It was about navigating a system designed to protect the powerful, even when they were in the wrong. Tanya's resolve only strengthened. She began organizing community meetings, connecting victims, witnesses, and journalists. She became a hub for truth, a source of information that others could rely on. And slowly, the tide began to turn. People started to demand accountability, to ask questions they had been too afraid to ask before. The officers implicated could no longer hide behind their uniforms, and the city began to notice. But the danger was growing. Tanya noticed a car parked across the street more often than usual. Strangers lingered near her apartment, and anonymous calls woke her in the dead of night. She knew that exposing the truth had consequences, and that some people would stop at nothing to protect their power. The very system she had relied on to respond could also be the one that failed her. One evening, while reviewing her files, Tanya realized something chilling. The pattern of misconduct was larger than she had thought. More officers, more victims, more lies buried deep within the system. Her heart raced as she connected the dots, understanding that the fight for justice would not be simple. It was a fight that could cost lives, including her own. And then it happened. A loud knock shattered the quiet of her apartment. Tanya froze, every nerve on edge. She knew she wasn't alone. Her hand trembled as she approached the door, and when she peeked through the peephole, her blood ran cold. The officer she had exposed was there, standing just beyond the threshold, watching, waiting, and sending a clear message. The fight was far from over. Tanya stepped back, her mind racing. The call that exposed a truth no one saw coming had set everything into motion, but now the consequences were undeniable. Courage had brought her this far, but the next step would require strategy, allies, and unshakable determination. One thing was certain. Silence was no longer an option, and the fight for justice was about to enter its most dangerous phase yet. Tanya couldn't sleep that night. The image of the officer outside her door haunted her, a reminder that the truth she had exposed came with real danger. She paced her apartment, going over every detail, every piece of evidence, and every connection she had made. The fight for justice was no longer abstract. It was personal. The next morning, she received a call from a local journalist who had been following her story. "We're ready to publish," the voice said. "Everything you've documented, the misconduct, the threats, the patterns. It's time people know the full truth." Tanya's hand shook. She had known this moment would come, but hearing it confirmed made her realize just how high the stakes were. Once the story went public, there would be no turning back. As the article went live, the city reacted instantly. Community forums exploded with outrage. Social media lit up with messages demanding accountability, and officials could no longer ignore the mounting pressure. Tanya felt a flicker of hope. Finally, her courage was making a difference, but hope was tempered by fear. She knew those she had exposed would retaliate, and the shadow of danger never left her side. Days passed with tense vigilance. Tanya's apartment was reinforced, every movement calculated, every step outside measured. She met with other victims in secret, sharing knowledge, and strategizing ways to protect themselves while ensuring their voices were heard. It became clear that the call she had answered had not only exposed corruption, but had also ignited a movement. People were no longer willing to stay silent. Then came the confrontation. Tanya was leaving a community meeting when she noticed the same car parked at the corner, the officer inside watching. Her heart raced, but she refused to show fear. She knew that courage was not the absence of fear. It was acting in spite of it. She continued walking, documenting the encounter discreetly on her phone, ensuring that every moment was recorded. Every action she took from this point forward would be evidence, and evidence was her shield. That night, Tanya sat alone, reviewing everything she had done. The realization hit her hard. One call had changed everything. One voice had started a ripple effect that exposed corruption, inspired a community, and challenged a system that often protected the powerful over the vulnerable. But Tanya also knew that this was just the beginning. The officers she had exposed would not stop, and the path ahead would demand even more bravery, strategy, and resilience. As she looked out the window at the quiet streets, a notification on her phone made her freeze. A new message had arrived, but this one was anonymous. It was from the officer she had exposed. "This isn't over," it read. Tanya's heart pounded harder than ever. The call that exposed what no one saw coming had set everything in motion, and now the real battle was about to begin. Tanya barely slept that night. Every noise, every creak of the building made her flinch. The message she had received from the officer wasn't just a threat. It was a warning, a reminder that exposing the truth came with real danger. Her phone buzzed constantly, alerts from journalists, neighbors, and concerned community members, each one reinforcing the weight of what she had started. The following morning, Tanya decided she couldn't wait for someone else to act. She began organizing a legal team, connecting with advocates who specialize in holding law enforcement accountable. Every document, every recorded threat, and every witness account she had meticulously gathered became a weapon in the fight for justice. Tanya realized that courage alone wasn't enough. Strategy and preparation were now essential for survival. As the day went on, tension grew. Tanya noticed a shadow following her from a distance as she walked to a meeting. Panic surged, but she stayed calm, documenting everything discreetly. Each step she took was measured. Every glance over her shoulder reminded her that those she'd exposed could retaliate at any moment. The fear was real, but so was her resolve. She refused to be silenced. By mid-afternoon, news reports began to shift. The story was gaining national attention. People were calling in with tips, sharing their own experiences with misconduct, and demanding accountability. Tanya's courage had sparked a movement, and suddenly she wasn't alone. The system, though slow, could no longer ignore the pressure, and officials were being forced to respond. Then came the personal danger she had feared. Tanya returned to her apartment to find a note slipped under her door. It wasn't a threat. It was a message that left her blood cold. "We're watching," it read. Her pulse quickened, and she realized that the officer she had exposed and his allies were escalating. This was no longer about reporting misconduct. It was about survival. Determined, Tanya contacted her legal team and the journalists covering her story. She shared everything, ensuring that every move she made was documented publicly. She understood that transparency was her shield, and by exposing the tactics of intimidation, she could protect herself while continuing the fight. But even as she felt a measure of safety, a gnawing fear lingered. The officer she confronted was powerful, connected, and unpredictable, and Tanya knew that the confrontation was far from over. That evening, as she sat reviewing the latest evidence and messages, Tanya heard a knock at her door. Her heart raced. She grabbed her phone and quietly recorded, ready for whatever came next. The knock was deliberate, heavy, and insistent. Tanya's hands trembled slightly, but she reminded herself, courage isn't the absence of fear. She opened the door slightly, and the shadow of the officer loomed just outside. Their eyes met, and in that instant, Tanya understood the real battle had only just begun. The call that exposed what no one saw coming had ignited a fire, revealed a system of corruption, and sparked a movement. But now, that same fire had drawn attention she couldn't ignore. Every decision, every action, and every step forward would carry consequences. And as the officer's shadow lingered at her doorstep, Tanya realized that bravery alone would not be enough to protect her. She would need intelligence, allies, and relentless determination to see this fight through. The next morning, Tanya felt the weight of exhaustion in her bones. Sleep had been impossible since the officer's shadow had loomed at her door. Every sound outside her apartment made her jump. Every unfamiliar face on the street triggered anxiety. She knew the danger was no longer abstract. It was real, immediate, and relentless. Despite the fear, she pushed forward. Tanya met with her legal team in a quiet, secure location. Every piece of evidence she had gathered was laid out. Messages, recordings, witness statements, and documentation of every incident. They discussed strategies, potential risks, and the steps needed to hold the officers accountable. Tanya realized that knowledge and preparation were her only weapons against a system that often shielded the powerful. Later that afternoon, she went to a community meeting, careful to observe her surroundings. Whispers followed her as she entered the room, some from supporters, others from those still unsure or intimidated by the officers she had exposed. Tanya spoke calmly but firmly, sharing the details of the misconduct and the threats she had faced. The room fell silent as the gravity of her revelations sank in. For many, it was the first time the full truth had been laid bare. After the meeting, Tanya felt a presence trailing her. She quickened her pace, heart pounding, aware that someone was following. Pulling out her phone, she discreetly recorded the shadowy figure keeping pace with her. It wasn't just intimidation anymore. The officer's reach was personal, invasive, and terrifying. Tanya knew she had to remain vigilant. Every step a calculated act to protect herself while continuing her mission. That night, Tanya received another message. This one was direct. Stop, or the consequences will be yours. The words made her stomach churn, but she refused to be intimidated. She shared the message with her legal team and journalist allies, ensuring that her safety was documented and publicized. Tanya understood that exposing corruption came with real risks, but hiding would only perpetuate the injustice. Courage was no longer a choice. It was a necessity. By the following day, the city was buzzing. Local news outlets covered the story extensively. Community groups demanded accountability, and residents began speaking out about their own experiences with misconduct. Tanya's bravery had sparked a movement, showing that one voice could make a difference. But amidst the growing attention, the threat lingered, a shadow that reminded her that the fight was far from over. As she returned home that evening, Tanya paused at the intersection near her apartment. A car slowly rolled by, the driver staring directly at her. Her pulse raced, but she held her composure. The call that had exposed what no one saw coming had ignited change, but it had also drawn the attention of those determined to protect their secrets. Tanya realized that from this point on, every decision, every action, and every step forward would require courage, strategy, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Tanya woke to the sound of her phone, buzzing nonstop. Notifications from the journalist, messages from community members, and emails from legal advisors filled the screen. The story was spreading faster than she had imagined. People were calling, demanding action, and sharing their own experiences of police misconduct. The movement she had sparked was growing, but so was the danger. She stepped outside cautiously, aware that the officer and his allies were likely watching. Every glance over her shoulder reminded her that the threats were real. Tanya had learned to trust her instincts, to observe patterns, and to document every suspicious action. She understood that exposing corruption required vigilance as much as courage. Later that day, Tanya received an anonymous tip about a secret meeting where the officer was allegedly coordinating with others to discredit her and her evidence. Her stomach churned, but she didn't hesitate. Tanya knew that confronting the truth meant taking risks. She shared the tip with her legal team and journalist allies, ensuring that the moment was documented. Transparency had become her most powerful shield. As night fell, Tanya returned home, senses heightened. She noticed a car parked in the usual spot, engine running, headlights dimmed. Her heart pounded, but she remained calm, discreetly recording the scene. She knew that evidence was not just proof, it was protection. The officer's presence was a reminder that the fight for justice had entered a dangerous, personal phase. The following morning brought unexpected support. Several community leaders had come forward publicly, speaking out about misconduct they had witnessed or experienced. Tanya realized that her courage had inspired others to step forward. Each story, each voice, added weight to the demand for accountability. The officer she had exposed could no longer operate in the shadows without scrutiny. But just as hope surged, Tanya's phone rang. It was a call she couldn't ignore. A voice she didn't recognize whispered a chilling warning. They're planning something. Be careful or you'll regret it. Tanya felt a cold rush of fear, but she didn't panic. She knew that every threat now had to be handled with strategy, intelligence, and calm determination. Courage alone was not enough. She needed allies, documentation, and precision. By evening, Tanya reviewed her files again. Every recording, every message, every piece of evidence was laid out before her. The magnitude of what she had uncovered was staggering. Systemic misconduct, abuse of power, and a network designed to protect wrongdoing. Tanya realized that the call that exposed what no one saw coming had ignited a movement, but it had also put her directly in harm's way. She could no longer act alone. As she glanced out her window at the quiet streets below, Tanya's eyes caught movement, a figure lingering in the shadows. Her pulse raced. The battle for justice had escalated beyond paperwork, public exposure, and community support. It had become personal, immediate, and unavoidable. Tanya understood that the next step she took would define not just her future, but the safety and accountability of the entire community. Tanya barely slept that night. The figure she had seen outside her window lingered in her mind, every heartbeat reminding her that the danger was no longer theoretical. She reviewed her evidence one more time, making sure everything was organized, backed up, and ready to be shared with authorities and journalists alike. Courage alone would not protect her. Preparation was now as crucial as bravery. The following morning, Tanya received a tip from a trusted community member. The officer she had exposed was attempting to intimidate others who had stepped forward. The message was clear. Her efforts were disrupting a system that had operated in secrecy for years. Fear clawed at her chest, but she refused to back down. If silence protected the powerful, speaking out was the only way to protect the vulnerable. Later, Tanya attended a press conference with the journalists covering her story. Cameras flashed, microphones captured every word, and for the first time, the faces of those involved in misconduct were being held accountable publicly. Tanya felt a mix of pride and anxiety. She knew that exposing the truth could trigger retaliation at any moment. The line between courage and recklessness had never felt thinner. As she walked home afterward, Tanya noticed the car again. It followed at a distance, headlights dimmed, engine quietly humming. Her pulse surged, but she remained calm, documenting the encounter. Every recording was proof, every observation a layer of protection. She understood now more than ever that exposing corruption came with real personal risk, but also created accountability that could no longer be ignored. That night, Tanya's phone buzzed with an unexpected message. "We know what you're doing. Stop now, or there will be consequences." The words made her stomach twist, but she took a deep breath. She shared the message with her legal team and journalist allies, ensuring that every threat was recorded and traceable. Tanya realized that transparency was her shield, courage her weapon, and allies her strongest defense. By the next morning, the city had begun to react. Residents who had remained silent for years began to speak up. Community meetings were filled with stories of misconduct, intimidation, and abuse. Tanya's initial call had sparked a movement, igniting courage in those who had felt powerless. But the danger had escalated. The officer she had exposed and his allies were now taking increasingly bold measures to intimidate her. As Tanya prepared to leave for another meeting, she glanced out the window and saw the shadow again, closer this time. The presence was unmistakable, deliberate, and terrifying. The fight for justice had reached a tipping point. Tanya understood that the battle was no longer abstract. It was immediate, personal, and unavoidable. Every step she took, every decision she made, could change the outcome of the fight, or put her directly in harm's way. The call that exposed what no one saw coming had ignited change, empowered community, and forced accountability into the light. But now, it had also put Tanya in the crosshairs. Courage, preparation, and vigilance would be her only allies as the real confrontation drew near. The stakes had never been higher, and the next move could determine everything. Tanya's nerves were on edge. Every step she took felt like walking into the unknown. The shadow that had been following her for days was now closer than ever. The city she had hoped would respond to truth and justice now felt like a labyrinth of danger, each street corner and alley a potential threat. She arrived at the community center for another meeting, her heart hammering in her chest. Inside, dozens of residents waited, some fearful, some determined. Tanya took a deep breath and began to speak, recounting every detail, every threat, and every instance of misconduct she had documented. The room was silent, the gravity of her revelations weighing heavily on everyone present. Suddenly, a commotion erupted outside. Tanya's instinct screamed danger. She ran to the door and saw the officer she had exposed standing with several others, his expression hard, calculating. He had come not just to intimidate, but to send a clear warning. Tanya's pulse surged. The fight she had started had escalated beyond words and documents. It was now a direct confrontation. Without hesitation, she discreetly recorded the encounter, ensuring that every movement, every threat, every interaction was captured. Her hands shook, but she remained composed. Tanya knew that courage alone would not save her. Evidence and public accountability were her only protection. The officer glared at her, a silent promise that the battle was far from over. Inside the center, residents rallied around Tanya, showing solidarity and courage. The presence of witnesses and cameras shifted the balance. The officer's intimidation tactics were met with resistance, voices raised in demand for accountability. Tanya realized that the movement she had sparked was now bigger than any one person. It was a collective force that could no longer be ignored. Yet, even as hope surged, Tanya knew the danger was far from over. As she left the meeting, a final message appeared on her phone. "This isn't over. Watch your next move." Her stomach twisted, a stark reminder that exposing corruption came at a cost. The fight for justice had only just begun, and the true consequences were yet to unfold. The call that exposed what no one saw coming had ignited a movement, revealed deep-rooted misconduct, and forced accountability into the open. But it had also put Tanya in the crosshairs of those who would do anything to protect their secrets. Courage, preparation, allies, and vigilance were now her only shields. And as she stepped into night, Tanya understood that the next chapter of this fight would test everything she had learned, and everything she was willing to risk. The days after confrontation were a blur of tension and vigilance. Tanya moved carefully through her neighborhood, always aware of her surroundings, always thinking 2 steps ahead. She had become hyper-alert, noticing faces, cars, and patterns she would have ignored before. The call that had started this storm had changed her life forever. Her legal team and journalist allies had increased their support, helping her plan every move with precision. Each meeting, each piece of evidence, each public statement was calculated to protect herself while continuing to expose misconduct. Tanya realized that courage alone wasn't enough. Strategy was now her lifeline. One evening, a neighbor came rushing to her apartment, breathless. "They're planning something," the neighbor whispered. "The officer is escalating. It's not just threats anymore." Tanya's heart pounded. She knew the officer's power and connections meant this could quickly turn dangerous. She reinforced her home security, documented every interaction, and prepared herself mentally for whatever came next. Despite the fear, the community began to rally. Other residents who had suffered misconduct stepped forward, emboldened by Tanya's courage. Meetings were held, voices were raised, and the city could no longer ignore the growing call for accountability. Tanya realized that her actions had sparked a movement far larger than herself, but she also knew that visibility had made her a target. Then came the moment that would define the fight. Tanya received a message that chilled her to the bone. "You've gone too far. This ends soon." It wasn't signed, but she knew exactly who it was from. Her pulse raced, but she refused to be paralyzed by fear. She shared the message with her allies, documented it publicly, and prepared herself for a direct confrontation. That night, as she reviewed her evidence and plans, a figure appeared near her apartment window. Tanya froze, adrenaline surging. The officer she had exposed was back, closer than ever, his presence a clear escalation. She understood that the real danger was unavoidable now. The stakes were no longer just about exposing misconduct. They were about survival, justice, and protecting the growing community that had rallied behind her. The call that exposed what no one saw coming had sparked change, empowered residents, and forced accountability into the open. But it had also set her in the crosshairs of a system determined to protect itself. Tanya knew that every decision from this point forward would determine the next chapter, not just for herself, but for everyone who had trusted her to fight for justice. The battle was reaching its peak, and the true test of courage, strategy, and resilience was about to begin. Tanya's heart was pounding like never before. Every step she took inside her apartment felt heavier, each sound sharper. She knew the officer who had haunted her for weeks was watching, waiting for any sign of weakness. The call that started it all had ignited a chain of events she could never have imagined, and now, the final confrontation was inevitable. That night, she received another message. This ends now. Her pulse surged, but she refused to panic. Tanya had prepared for this moment. She had evidence, allies, a community behind her, and the truth on her side. With every breath, she reminded herself that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting despite it. The figure appeared again outside her window. Tanya stayed calm, capturing everything on video. The officer's shadow moved deliberately, a silent threat, but Tanya's resolve was unshakable. She activated a live stream through her journalist ally, broadcasting the moment in real time to ensure transparency. Every move, every word, every second of intimidation would be documented for the world to see. The tension was unbearable. Minutes felt like hours. The officer glared, realizing that his power to intimidate had been neutralized by courage, strategy, and community. He finally stepped back, his presence a silent acknowledgement that Tanya's determination had shifted the balance. As dawn broke, Tanya looked out over her neighborhood. The streets were quiet, but she knew change had begun. The system could no longer ignore her. The community could no longer remain silent. And the truth had won, at least for now. The fire she had sparked with a single phone call had grown into a movement, one that would continue long after this night. Tanya sat back, exhausted but unbroken. She had faced fear, threats, and the weight of exposing misconduct head-on. She had learned that one voice, one call, could change the course of an entire community. And while the battle was far from over, she had proven that courage, preparation, and truth were unstoppable when combined. The call that exposed what no one saw coming had revealed the dark corners of power, illuminated injustice, and sparked a fight for accountability that could never be silenced. Tanya's story was now the story of everyone who refused to stay silent. If you want to see more stories like Tanya's, true, emotional, and shocking account of courage, injustice, and the fight for justice, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Like this video if it gave you chills. Share it to let others know the truth. And join our community so these voices are never forgotten. One call, one story, one brave person can change everything. And you don't want to miss what's coming next.